Booty Texino. It was a Monday morning when I happened upon the turquoise streaker marking. I had no clue what it meant, but I chuckled at the lewd nature of a butt wearing a hat. I had known about train monikers and hobo markings for around a year, but had never really interacted with trains in any intimate manner besides waiting for them to cross the street. I decided to dedicate time to better understanding the culture and evolution of freight monikers and to ask, what is Booty Texino? I went back to the refrigerated boxcars I had visited, often referred to as reefers. I had some time that morning and I snuck between the two sets of tracks to take pictures of the monikers in between. That was my first set of research. A moniker is a drawing done typically with a paint stick or grease marker. It is often repeated on many train cars. The tradition dates back to the early days of the railroad, with rail workers leaving their name and the date they had worked on that car. The modern understanding of monikers began in the 1920s during the Great Depression and the flourishing of the hobo culture. Many unemployed Americans began to ride freight trains as a means to be nomadic in America for free. While they rode the cars, they left markings on the facade, which developed into drawings. The tradition permeated to the common folk just wanting to leave their mark to travel the country later on. Some examples of the classic moniker riders are Colossus of Rhodes, Gypsy Sphinx, The Rambler, Kodak Kid, Bozo Texino, Coltrane, and Herbie and his Palm Tree. They all repeated their iconography over a countless number of train cars. The Rambler based his cocktail glass off of an outing in my hometown of Seattle.
While I was up there, they had cocktail lounges. Now, Texas didn't have liquor by the drink at that time. You can only buy it in a private club in Texas. But up there in the Northwest, where they had cocktail lounges, and that's what they would have. They'd have a sign, say cocktail lounge, and they'd have that slam champagne glass with those bubbles. And I remember, that's what I remember. Well, maybe I can do that. So I started experimenting with that. And the first one was like a triangle with a circle on it, you know. And it was pretty bad. And I don't know, I had 8 or 10 bubbles on it and this, that, and that. But I drew my very first one on October the 1st in 1968. That was the first drawing that I made in Houston. So now I went to the 7 bubbles, and there's only one exception to that. Every car that I ever rode on, that date and the name of that town it was on is exactly where that car was on that day.
I was curious about how the moniker tradition had modernized after a second major event, the first being the Great Depression. This event I consider to be the popularization of modern street graffiti writing. The practice has a similar motivation to that of train moniker writing. However, it exists in a very different context. One occurs on train cars with markers, the other occurs on any surface existing in a city with any implement that leaves a permanent mark. I noticed that the crossover between the two was very discernible, so I became curious about how the two had permeated into each other. Early street writer Repause CBM told me that he began participating in the moniker tradition because he kind of just wanted to get into it after spending time painting trains. He marks his clown characters on the tanker cars that are ever prevalent in the Philadelphia area. Margaret Kilgallen is a famous American studio artist who passed at the age of 33. Her work highlights not feminist icons, but rather lesser-known women who have contributed just as much. Her work lives on in the form of her monikers on train cars, in which she often drew the faces and figures of female characters. Shown with her is famous street writer Twist.
We're nervous. Look at something else for a while. Give her a stick. You gonna go up there?
Okay.
There are random.
Bozo is a graffiti writer and artist from Seattle. Their work focuses on a character they refer to as Squiggly Bear. Any Seattle resident will recognize the bear because it has existed throughout the city for years. Bozo's bear is an example of how the moniker tradition has permeated into modern graffiti street writing by using a symbol in place of a word or name to leave your mark. When I first heard about monikers, the first thing that came to mind was Bezos's bear. I think that Bezos's bear is the perfect example of how the moniker culture has permeated into modern street graffiti. Nazar UBK is a graffiti writer from Seattle who participates in a similar act by painting the head of a woman in large form in place of a lettered fill-in. Arab GSB is a graffiti writer from the Seattle area who is best known for his time up in the streets of Seattle and New York, as well as his incredibly technical piecing on freight trains more recently. Arab is another example of a graffiti writer who adapted their passion for painting into studio work and lettering. Arab is a participant in the moniker tradition in an extraordinary manner. His work is incredibly similar and often looks like oil paintings, of which he is proficient in. Arab uses the moniker sex appeal for small-scale train monikers drawn/painted with paint sticks. Merlot, Arab's partner, also participates in the moniker tradition in a similar manner, with incredibly detailed drawings done with paint sticks. Moniker culture is shifting towards a more intricate and involved practice, with new, more precise tools now available. Mean streaks, Sakuras, Art Primo streakers, etc. being widely accessible and available. New options are being explored, but the heart of the tradition is still alive. All the pictures of monikers I have gathered are modern examples, and they all still carry the spirit of the tradition of spreading a name and image with the preservation of anonymity and mystery.
Mind like George Lucas, I think like Stanley Kubrick. House full of eucalyptus, that boy straight mucus. So let's get straight to it. My chains is humongous, permanent bling, my tooth is. Yeah, I'm a strange human. This insane jewelry collection take a week to shoot it. Record an album with Mercedes, let GQ EQ it. I think I'm Frank Lucas, slang with my Wu-Tang school is. A straight A student. But a brain stupid. All in the past now, walls looking back now, back to the wall. Push your walls to the back, don't back down, fuck up. Tell them how to fuck your mama ain't raised no bitch. Gloves on the mask, more mask on the lap now. Mac on the lap, on the hip, right red, blue lights in the background. Cops on the back down, just pretty click off. On the skyway to hell, with smiley face you well. I call the shots, you making calls. If I take an L, then they gon' take the loss. To hell. That's OG times 3. Triple OG still just shows I'ma be here still.